Senate Republicans threatened to defy President Trump and his furious push to get his massive policy bill onto his desk by his self-imposed July 4th deadline. But Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Senate GOP leaders furiously lobbied holdouts one by one and got them to fall in line on the first hurdle, starting floor debate on the bill, with many roadblocks still left to clear. Now, leaders held that vote open for more than 3.5 hours to finish the job. That's just about longer than any Senate vote this year. And moderate holdouts like Lisa Murkowski voted yes to begin the debate, as did conservatives like Mike Lee, Rick Scott, and Cynthia Lummis, as well as Senator Ron Johnson, who flipped from a no to a yes. And in the end, Tom Tillis and Rand Paul were the only Republicans voting against starting debate, although some are still demanding more changes before deciding whether to ultimately vote yes on the sweeping bill. It was yet another example of Trump's dominance over his party and his ability to get other institutions of government to bend to his whims, as he did this past week in a sweeping victory with the Supreme Court that expands the power of the presidency to enact his policies unilaterally. Now, overnight, Democrats protested and forced Senate clerks to read the 940-page bill aloud, pushing back debate in the Senate until later today and final votes into Monday, and likely setting up a bitterly divided and narrow House GOP majority to decide how to proceed. Let's break this all down with my excellent panel this morning. Semaphore is David Weigel, Punchbowl News is Anna Palmer, Bloomberg's Mario Parker, and our very own Lauren Fox, who was burning the midnight oil last night on Capitol Hill and is up bright and early for us this morning. Thanks to you all for being here. So before we get into just so much of everything that happened over the last day and weeks, just to remind everyone about how complex, how significant this piece of legislation is, and it would affect so many people, millions of people, because it includes a multi-trillion-dollar overhaul of the United States tax code, deep spending cuts, changes to social safety net programs like Medicaid and food stamps, hundreds of billions of dollars in new funding for defense programs to help also Trump carry out his deportation policies, phasing out green energy tax credits, a $5 trillion increase to the national debt limit, and there are so many other details. But underneath all the details is why there's been so much Republican infighting, which led to all the scenes we saw play out late into the night last night. Trump, Vance, pressing these holdouts to get in line. You were there, Lauren. What are your big takeaways from last night? And the big question we have today is, are they ultimately going to get the votes to pass this bill?
Yeah, it was really interesting because we were watching Lisa Murkowski so closely last night. We did not know how she was going to vote. And then when she voted yes, it felt like, okay, the momentum's starting to move.
And she was, for about 90 minutes, she was sitting there not saying how she was going to vote.
Exactly. And that was sort of my focus. Then all of a sudden, after she votes yes, then there's this mad scramble with the conservatives in Thune's office for more than an hour at that point. And that became then the focus for so many of us. Okay, that shows you how leadership has such a fine line to walk here, because on the one hand, they got to give Lisa Murkowski what she needs to be happy. She's more of a moderate Republican. She has concerns about her state of Alaska getting Medicaid funding slashed, as well as potential cuts to food stamps in her state. Meanwhile, you have conservatives who are asking for a totally opposite bucket of items to get their votes. And that just shows you how difficult this is for John Thune and how difficult it's going to be once again for Mike Johnson once it gets to the House.
You think it will pass the Senate?
I think it's going to take more arm twisting. I still think we have to watch Susan Collins really closely. I think the conservatives are in a good spot right now. But again, this amendment process is going to have to play out in that vote-a-rama.
Yeah.
And that can be unpredictable.
It's
it can
really
be a little bit unruly.
And that's why it's for those who don't speak, Senate speak. It basically allows any senator to offer any amendment for as long as he or she wants, until they tire themselves out, so they can make a whole host of changes on this bill through the course of the day, which is why this is such an unpredictable, unwieldy process. And they're following this route so they can pass this bill along straight party lines without any Democratic support, which is why, of course, this is also partly why this is so controversial. But what we also saw yesterday was something so rare in the Trump era, which is a Republican defying Donald Trump. Senator Tom Tillis, who is up for re-election this year, voted of next year, voted no, as did Senator Rand Paul. We knew Rand Paul was going to vote no. He's opposed to the increase in the debt limit in this plan. Trump railed against both of them on Truth Social. This is what Tom Tillis said about the bill. He said it would result in tens of billions of dollars in lost funding for North Carolina, including our hospitals in rural communities. Trump went after Tillis on 2 posts on Truth Social last night and said that he would support a primary against Senator Tom Tillis. He said, I'll be meeting with these people these candidates, potential candidates, over the coming weeks, looking for someone who will properly represent the great people of North Carolina, and so importantly, the United States of America. And of course, thank you for your attention to this matter. But it's all really a scare Trump's effort to intimidate other Republicans who may be thinking about buckling to ultimately get them to fall in line.
Right, and one thing you can do with a majority of this size is let someone like Tom Tillis, in theory, vote against the party. He is probably, if Roy Cooper runs, which he has a timeline for doing, the former governor, probably the most endangered Senate Republican. And the arguments Democrats made about Medicaid, really 90% of the arguments about this bill were about how it draw people for Medicaid, even after assurances from North Carolina Republicans that they would comport themselves with this in the state. That was his reluctance. But Trump's feeling really good, and he has won North Carolina 3 times, so you can see his confidence that somebody with his mindset would have no trouble with that. And also, this screws up some of their messaging. Talking to conservatives and how they'll message this bill, they don't talk as much about Medicaid. They talk about the border funding that's going to be in the bill. They talk about the ways they're going to run against Democrats having voted against school choice and border security, and Tillis screws that up. So in Trump's mind, does it make sense? Any other Republican could sell that message better? Sure.
But don't you think, Tillis had put himself into a corner, right? I mean, publicly for the last week, he'd been handing out handouts at meetings. He'd been saying he wasn't going to vote for it. He said this was Republicans' Obamacare. I mean, if he had switched course on this, I think it would be really, really difficult for him. I mean, the attack ads write themselves.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to get so deep into the North Carolina primary here, but look, Tillis is probably the best chance they have to hold that seat. But Trump only cares about loyalty.
No, absolutely. And you saw the statement that the White House sent to senators, right, saying that this would be the ultimate betrayal should they not follow through.
Ultimate betrayal. Even past presidents would say, okay, if you got to vote no because it may help you win your reelection, but not this president.
Right. No, this is the ultimate betrayal for Trump, right? And the opening salvo for all of this was last weekend when it came out that he was ready to primary Thomas Massie, right, as well. So you saw him starting to wind up for all of this for anyone that got out of line, even as he had been relatively quiet for Trump, right? So he had the soft power with golfing with Rand Paul, Lindsey Graham, and others yesterday, right? We hear about him at the White House making calls as well. We've had the visits to the White House also, but then you come out with this cudgel that he's been using to rule the party for the last decade, right? Which is the fact that even if you survive a primary from your right, it's costly, it's expensive, it's not going to be fun. You're going to get beat up.
And so let's talk a little bit about just the horse trading, because the substance really does matter, as I mentioned here at the top, because there were actually a ton of changes that they made to slip into this bill that was released at about midnight, almost Saturday morning, in this 940-page bill that includes an additional $25 billion of a relief fund for rural hospitals. It would delay the so-called provider tax, which is a huge factor. One reason why that Tom Tillis voted no, because of his concerns about that, how they would cut Medicaid. It would new requirements for wind and solar projects. And then there were some very parochial issues for Lisa Murkowski, adding food stamp requirements. Alaska suddenly is not going to be subjected to them, and tax cuts to Alaskan whalers. I remember the Cornhusker kickback, for those who may be remembering that, Obamacare. That's what won Ben Nelson to support that back in 2009 and 2010. She voted yes, perhaps because of this.
Yeah, I mean, these were snuck into the bill into Saturday morning, and it was still really tough to get her vote on the Senate floor. But I think that the food stamp waiver is the most significant piece of this, because right now the federal government covers the cost of that program for states. They were essentially arguing that what was going to happen is if your state had a high air rate, you were going to be on the hook for covering some of those costs. Alaska has an extremely high air rate, so this was going to really impact her state. That waiver is so interesting, and they don't name Alaska by name. They just say states that are not connected to the United States of America, not part of the continuous United States of America, will qualify. So Hawaii also gets to ride on that train.
Yeah, it was so interesting. And now, what happens now? Okay, so let's just say this bill passes the Senate. I think there's probably a greater than 50% chance it ultimately passes the Senate. As Lauren said, we'll see what Susan Collins does. If she votes no, she has not said how she'll vote on the final passage. But J.D. Vance would be there to break the tie, so they'd have to lose 2 more Republicans for this to sink in the Senate. That seems at the moment unlikely. But what about the House? The House is really complicated right now because they passed their bill by a single vote before Memorial Day. And there are conservatives upset about the changes in the Senate. There are moderates concerned about the changes as well. Just a couple of them put out tweets just yesterday. One of the most swing district Republicans, David Valadao of California, said, "I will vote no." He said in a tweet yesterday, citing the Medicaid changes. And then you have the hardliners like Chip Roy of Texas, who says, he said he did it. It's important to know that jamming us with this bill before he has a chance to review it is, quote, bad. How do you expect the conservatives to play this in the House?
They have caved at every important step of this process, and that's how Democrats now view it, too. They have heard Chip Roy be incredibly passionate about things that he cannot vote for until he votes for them. So the Democratic math in this is still a lot of looking back and being bitter that 3 members ran for election or re-election when they were old and dying of cancer, and they're down 3 votes in order to block this. That's complicated it. They take Don Bacon announcing not announcing. The rumors that Don Bacon will retire in Omaha, he's one of 3 Republicans in a Harris seat, a seat the Harris won in November. That changes the math, too. There are not that many Republicans that are in danger beyond Valadao, and Bacon, if he's not running, not technically in danger.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say, listen, they got the SALT cap, right? That's the biggest thing to me.
State and local tax deduction.
State and local tax deduction. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is it. New York Republicans were demanding that for their vote. They ultimately got it. They raised the amount people can deduct in their local and state taxes to $40,000. It's now at $10,000. That's enough for several of those Republicans. One of those says he's still a no. But we'll see.
Right. I mean, we'll see. But I think by the fact that they raised it back up to $40,000, even though it's only 5 years, it is a huge win for the moderates here when it comes to that. I agree with you. I feel like some of the conservative Republicans here, the Chip Roys of the world, feel a lot like Senator Ron Johnson. They're no until they're yes. Are any of these House Republicans really going to stand in the way of Trump's signature piece of legislation? I have a hard time thinking that, it's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. The speaker and probably J.D. Vance and probably the president are going to have to get involved. But it feels like the momentum here is they are going to get this bill done.
Yeah, and the House Speaker and the House Majority Leader Steve Scalise said yesterday they would call the House back within 48 hours, potentially after the Senate votes. We'll see if that actually happens before July 4th. That's a big question. But let's talk about the politics of this. This is a bill that, if you look at public opinion polls, not particularly popular among the American public right now. This is among a Fox News poll from this past week. It says that total number of independents who support this bill, not good. 22% favor it. 73 of independents oppose the bill. Ouch. I asked Republican senators about this over the last day or so, just about the politics, the impacts on the midterms, and about why they believe why this bill is so unpopular according to the polls.
I think that's a result probably of doing one big bill. If we'd have broken this thing up and done border and military early on, we'd have got Democrat votes for that, made the tax cuts permanent.
The polls don't look particularly favorable to the bill.
I've heard you say that. I've heard people say that. And I was like, what poll? Because in the red states, in every red state I know of, they love it. It's President Trump's agenda. The bill is popular because the president is popular, and we're moving forward with it.
I think that's when you pass it and prove the public wrong and let them live with lower taxes and the permanency of tax cuts.
I mean, I think Lindsey Graham summed it up in your interview, right? The fact is that the tax cuts that Trump passed in 2017 are set to expire. They're being essentially held hostage by this bill with everything else, right? So they have nothing really new to tout about the bill. Maybe no tax on tips, overtime, et cetera. But the the ask that this White House is putting forth to Republicans, right, where you got a fourth of your Republican voters who use Medicaid, who are in the marketplace, a third of which are identify as MAGA as well. The fact that you're essentially throwing Democrats who are wayward in a lake, essentially a log for which to latch on to themselves as well. I mean, when you look toward 2026, the Republicans that I speak to, they're nervous about the political backlash of this.
It's the messaging failure so far by the Republicans to sell what this is. We've seen this happen in other majorities where they fight over the process without selling it to the public.
Well, and they're not unified on what the best parts of this bill kind of are, right? I think
they just call it beautiful, but what's
exactly? And I think everybody believes that the tax cuts are important. But if you're an American sitting at home and you've enjoyed these tax cuts for a period of time, are you really going to notice that they didn't go away and then come back, right? I think the fact that they're going to fix this problem before it's a real problem might actually hurt them in their re-elections as well, because people don't necessarily remember what their tax rates were before 2017.
Yeah.
Most people don't.
And if they don't see it, then we'll see how they impact and they react in the midterms. It'll define the midterms, no doubt about it. Up next, a stunner in America's biggest city leaves Democrats divided on the path forward. New reporting on that next. And later, RFK Jr. had a busy week. His new vaccine policies and what they mean for you. That's ahead.